Next up, we have James Dello, and he'll be kicking off the presentations today in the Art of Collaboration track. And just a fun fact that James sent through to me this morning, he actually spent 5 hours, 500 meters underground in a coal mine so he could understand the needs of group users better. And this 5 hours was spent traveling along wide underground roadways. Going through the safety training was one of the key insights of his experience. So with that in mind, I'm going to invite James up to give you his presentation on kick-ass collaboration everywhere with Confluence.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, now I need my clicker. Okay, right, g'day everyone. So for those of you who did have fun last night, I hope you'll sort of keep up with me. I will be sort of asking you to think just a little bit this morning in this presentation. So hopefully you're not going to doze off, and there will be a few questions. I might ask Matt to jump up when we do that just to sort of shout back to me some of the answers. So I'm here to talk about kick-ass collaboration everywhere with Confluence. My interest in the Atlassian suite of products is really Confluence, and about using it not in that sort of typical maybe idea of dev tools, but really how we use tools like Confluence across the entire organisation. Now, to get into that topic, really just want to sort of state that the business problem that I want to talk about this morning, and that is adoption of Confluence by business users needs a different approach from the early adopters in the IT department. Actually, you know, this isn't really a problem that's unique to the IT department. There's a lot of tools out there that different groups within organisations go out and find. And what often happens is that group goes, wow, this is great. They implement a tool, they all use it together, it's brilliant, and then they show it to another group in the organisation, and that group goes, nah, I'm not getting it. So that's kind of the business problem that I want to address this morning in my presentation, is how do you get Confluence out of the IT department and into the rest of your organisation. So, to get you thinking about this is a little exercise called head, heart and hand. Now this is what I'm just going to ask Matt to jump up and maybe help me. Now, the head represents the rational thinking of a person. The heart is obviously that emotional one, and the hand is the kind of the tactile, the tools that people need. Now, if you think about the people in your organisation, I'd like to just get a few ideas from people of what comes to mind when you think about what's the rational response when you show them Confluence. And then I'll ask what's the emotional response, and then what are the things that people say they need before they're willing to give Confluence a go. So can we just get a few ideas? And I'm just going to note those down because we'll come back to them. Yeah. So what's the rational response that people say when you show them Confluence?
Yeah.
Why do I need this? I have email.
Yep, great.
So that was...
Why do I need it?
This
Sorry.
when I have email.
Yep. Any more?
Yep.
How is this better than the other management?
So how is this better than the other systems we use?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. I don't have time to learn a new tool.
Correct. Now, is that a rational response or is that an emotional response?
Anyone else? Yeah? Is that SharePoint? I saw someone else over here with their hand up.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Okay, if not, what about an emotional response? What's an emotional response when they see Confluence?
Whining.
Whining. I don't have time.
Yep.
I don't care.
I don't care and fear.
I don't care. Thanks, Ryan.
Yep. Fear.
Fear.
Yep.
It's a good one.
Okay. Now, what about when they say to you, okay, if I'm going to use this, you've got to give me X? What are the things they say they want before they're willing to give Confluence a go?
All my Excel spreadsheets.
I want all my Excel spreadsheets.
Yep. We've got a story about spreadsheets. We'll come to that. Okay, anything else?
Anyone? Yep. I didn't catch that one.
Templates and training. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so, thanks Matt. So we've got a few ideas there of, you know, what that rational response is, what that emotional response is, and kind of what are the things they want to make it happen. We will come back and revisit that at the end, and maybe see if we've got some different ideas about how we responded there. Because I guess there's some real classic responses there, particularly one about fear. You know, the users out there are just afraid of this stuff. They don't want to give it a go, or maybe they've got unreasonable requests that they won't use it until you do X. And really what I want to talk about this morning is, well, why do users think like that? And perhaps actually more so, why do we think users think like that? So, grab my clicker again. So keep those in mind and we'll come back. What I'm going to cover today are these three things. What is kick-ass collaboration? I'm going to talk about understanding users and also some rules to collaborate by. And I hope, you know, at the end of the session, at the very end, there'll be three things, three ideas you can take away and really think about as you go about the business of trying to get Confluence used across your whole organisation. What we're going to deal with first, though, is this real tricky question of what is kick-ass collaboration. This cultural reference might be lost on some of the North Americans in the room, but if you're from Australia or from the UK, in my generation, you might remember a TV show called Monkey, or Monkey Magic as it was known. Now, the reason I thought it might be good to talk about this is because collaboration, in some ways, is a bit like Monkey. Monkey was this, a show that was recorded in China and then dubbed into English, and it was all rather crazy and confusing. And to be quite honest, when you talk to people about what is collaboration, they sort of often scratch their head and they find it hard to define. They're not quite sure what it is. And, you know, as a kid growing up watching Monkey, I was never quite sure what I was watching. It was quite funny and it was exciting, but I never quite understood. If you actually look at Monkey, though, there is some things there that represent collaboration. One of the first things is this group of people, and it featured the guy in the red in the middle, who was this kind of god sort of like powerful superhero. Could do magic. The person sort of sitting down was Master, was the leader, the person that he was trying to protect, and they were going on a journey. So we kind of had leaders, we had people that were there to help, they had a goal to achieve. So there were some elements of collaboration in the Monkey story. They were going somewhere, there was a team of people, and I think one of the other key things is that the band that made up this group, in a way kind of represent the idea that you don't always choose who you get to work with. And all the characters had particular flaws. And I think, again, that represents the reality of organisations. We don't always get to choose who we work with. People have strange behaviours. We actually all don't behave rationally all the time. Sometimes we work very emotionally. And some people, I guess, have got skills or tools that others don't have. So Monkey had a magic staff that could be as big or as small as he needed. He could do this weird thing where he goes, whoosh, and a cloud would appear that he could ride on and fly around. So he had all these special tools that the other characters in his little band of ninja fighters couldn't do. So you're probably still sitting here going, though, collaboration? Monkey? What's he going on about? You know, we've really got to try and put some meat on the bones of what do we mean by kick-ass collaboration. But it's a bit of a crazy world out there in organisations. So again, keep that in mind. So here's a nice definition from AIM. And AIM's an organisation, an industry group that's interested in information management and collaboration. And their quote here is, collaboration relies on openness and knowledge sharing, but also some level of focus and accountability on the part of the business organisation. That's a very nice, sensible definition of collaboration. What I like about that is it's kind of saying, yeah, you collaborate like Monkey, but you've kind of got a purpose. And yeah, Monkey had a purpose. They were on this journey together, this tribe of fighters. They had an objective. And they weren't just there together for no reason, they had that goal in mind. But you know, for me, this sort of captures some of what we mean by collaboration and what kick-ass collaboration might be, but it still doesn't quite do it for me. If we go to this next one, Clay Shirky is an author. You might have heard of him. He's written a great book called Here Comes Everybody. And this is one quote from that book, which is, and he says, the basic capabilities of tools like Flickr reverse the old order of group activity, transforming gather then share into share then gather. And that's really interesting when you think about it, because you know, most companies, you might have a big file share and you sort of dump information into it. And you know, really, this idea of gather then share is kind of that model, because what happens is you're an employee sitting there working away and you write a report and you go, okay, the report's finished, I better save it somewhere so that someone else can find it, and it gets dumped onto a file share. Okay? In this modern sort of social computing environment, and this is the environment that Confluence is part of, we've flipped that model around. It's share then gather, i.e. put that information out there and then we can pull out what we need. So I think that reflects a really critical point to understand about what we're doing with Confluence. It's not just a really useful web tool, is actually part of a whole shift in how we manage and deal with information, how we collaborate. So I think that's a really important quote. Another way of thinking about it, though, is also around complexity. And these are ants. And ants, I guess, really symbolise, I guess, another idea of what collaboration is. Ants are very simple, as you know, but they can do amazing things. And actually, when you think about it, how do ants work? They leave these little chemical trails. You know, another ant comes along and says, oh, there might be some food over there, or we need to get this thing and take it back to the nest. And it's all done with very simple signals of activity. And again, we see that in tools like Confluence, where you can see this activity stream coming through the tool. So from very small pieces, we can actually achieve really big things. So that's another metaphor for collaboration. It's all small pieces loosely joined together, and we can achieve really big things. But hey, let's really make it tangible. This is from a new book called Social Business by Design, and they've gone out and looked at the stats of businesses that are using the social technologies, not just Confluence, and they've sort of averaged out some of the data to give us some figures to work with, and this is just a few examples. So what does kick-ass collaboration? It's not Monkey running around with his staff beating up demons. It's actually about real bottom-line business benefit. So if you want to describe what kick-ass collaboration is in your organisation, this is what you should be sort of thinking about. So it's about increased productivity, it's about increased revenue, reduced costs. Oh, I've got increased revenue twice. Well, why not? Let's do that twice. We've got some examples there, though. You know, it's 30% faster support processes, 30% more satisfied customers, 20% less on travel and communications, and 35% more collaboration between departments and teams. So if your organisation is using social collaboration tools like Confluence, these are the sorts of benefits you can be telling your organisation, this is what we're trying to achieve. You want to know what kick-ass collaboration is? That's what kick-ass collaboration looks like to me. Let's just say, though, from a Confluence point of view, well, what does that look like? Well, this is what it looks like to me. One is that people are working in Confluence. Again, it sounds obvious, but what working in Confluence means is that they're going to Confluence. They're doing their work there. It's not a destination. It's not a graveyard for information. It's not that old model where we would sort of gather and then share. We're sharing and then gathering. And I think one of the critical things that comes with that as well is that you know, information is open by default. If you're deploying Confluence and going absolutely crazy with permissions and locking everything down because the finance manager doesn't want the HR manager to see anything, you're probably going about it the wrong way. And of course, the other key indicator if this is working well is that there's less time lost in email. So very tangibly, what should that look like? That's what it looks like. That previous slide, though, is kind of what the business benefits should be. You should be seeing real bottom line benefits flowing through to your organisation. Now, what makes Confluence such a good tool for collaboration so you can get those benefits, so you can reduce email, so you can work inside the thing? I'm going to go through 4 key things, which I'm hoping that for some of you might go, well, that's pretty obvious. But the reason I want to go through these 4 things that I think makes Confluence a really good tool for collaboration is that when you're going out and talking to people, I think this gives you a bit of a framework to think about, well, you know, if you're sitting down with a manager and you're saying, well, why would I want to use Confluence? These are 4 things you can take them through. So the first one is tools. At the most simplest level, for an individual user or a group of people, you've got a whole kit bag out of the box with Confluence that you can do stuff with. And of course, you can add more plugins to give you even more macros that do more things. But you've got a Swiss Army knife of tools to solve business problems with. And it can be simple things like a task list, but it can also be about embedding a video, which is part of an internal comms campaign, to try and tell people in your organisation about something new in your organisation. Okay? But you've got a kit bag there with Confluence out of the box. The next thing we've got is working out loud. Think about the ants and the little chemical trail they leave behind them. This is really critical in a social collaboration environment where you're using Confluence, is to understand that this working out loud is one of the real critical things that makes Confluence such a good tool for collaboration in the 21st century. So that activity stream, don't just take it for granted. That's something you should highlight with people in your organisation. I like to call it hash work out loud. The next one that builds on that is the network. So the people networking Confluence is important too. You know, what used to happen again is we'd dump information into a file share. There's a folder name that you didn't understand. Maybe there was some really ridiculously long file naming convention that you didn't understand as well. Didn't really know what that document was. But for the first time, we've got a tool, tools like Confluence, where you can actually see who owned that information, who wrote that information, who commented on that information, who updated that information. You can go to the user and find out what information they have. This is a really different paradigm for sharing information where we've got the context of the person and you can see what they've been doing. And the final thing is integration. And I think this is really important as well. You know, at one end we've got those macro tools, and they answer a lot of use cases. The next one up, though, is this idea of integrating Confluence with other systems. Confluence doesn't have to do everything, and actually if you do look at the rest of the Atlassian suite, you can sort of see how Confluence serves a particular need. There are lots of other very specific tools that do other things, but it's the ability to bring all these things together. What you need to think about is, when you're talking to business users who aren't developers, is what's their Jira? What's their Greenhopper? What's the tool that they use that's really critical for them that we could bring into Confluence? So not only does it add value to Confluence, but actually makes their working lives easier. So that the fourth weapon you've got, if you like, in your toolkit for talking to users about how to use, how Confluence can help them, is this final step of integrating information into Confluence. So, one last point though in this section of the presentation, and these are some carrots from my fridge. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to find a Creative Commons image of some carrots that I could use. So those are my carrots. You might be thinking, okay, great, we've got this kit bag of tools. How do I go out there and, and get people to start using it? Thinking about head, heart and hand. I think one of the mistakes that organisations think sort of fall into is this idea of trying to use little incentives. And I guess there's sort of a balance between carrot and stick. With tools like Confluence, it's really hard to force people to use them. You can force people to use the expense system, for example, and it can be a really horrible system, but if people want their money back, they're going to jump through hoops. Same with your timesheets. If you want to get paid, you've got to fill out the timesheet, right? A tool like Confluence is kind of discretionary or voluntary. The more you put in, the more others will get out, but you kind of choose to use it in a really proactive way. So we kind of want to think about, it's all about incentives, encouraging people to do stuff. The thing is, though, you've got to be really careful with incentives, okay? You can't offer a bottle of wine or an iPad every time someone makes a comment, okay? One, that's just not sustainable. The other issue is, and you might hear people talking about gamification, is that guess what? Humans are really kind of savvy at gaming systems, all right? And I remember trying to sort of have an incentive scheme for people to submit information into a knowledge management sort of tool. And it was, getting points for the number of documents. Well, these really clever guys, they sort of took a report and they went, oh, this has got like, 50 chapters in it. If we just submit one chapter at a time, we can all get points. And it was only because there was someone sort of looking over the submissions and they go, well, hang on, this is one document. You're not all going to get, the points for these 50 submissions. It's one submission, okay? So if you create these little gimmicks, if you like, and you rely on them too much, people will game them and you're going to lose momentum. What you really want to appeal to is kind of more intrinsic motivation. You want to give them a tool that adds value. So it's one thing to use some little incentives to get people interested, but don't rely on them. You've actually got to give them a tool that adds value, because if it adds value, they're going to keep using it. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So actually, I said originally the next section was understanding users. Really, we should really be talking about understanding people, because it's people. Different people have different needs, they have different motivations, different behaviours. If we try and boil them down to thinking about them as users, we can fall into some traps about making assumptions, particularly when we think about what are their motivations, what are their needs, and all those sorts of things. Just getting back to the point of the carrots, this is a bit of a diagram that describes a change management process for organisations that's based on innovation theory. And what it says at the top, and I won't go into all the bits, but basically it says that the organisational layer, there's a bit of a decision-making process that management go through. And they might say, oh, we need a collaboration tool. It's a problem because, people aren't collaborating. Well, what should we use? Well, we use Jira, let's use Confluence, okay? So they install Confluence, everyone's really happy, and they've got to then start getting people to use it. Now, what we used to do in change management is really think quite generically at that kind of process. It would be organisation picks, we roll out the tool, we do change management, people are happy. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that because, people are individuals, they're in part of this network system, it's this complex sort of ant colony of an organisation you've got. Not everyone hears about the new tool at the same time, they don't all understand it in the same way. So what we've built in is the idea there's an individual layer here. And that means that every individual in your organisation, when you introduce Confluence, goes through the same process. They become aware. They go, oh, that's interesting. Should I use that? I'll give it a go. And hopefully they say, yeah, I'm going to keep using it, which is that final adoption stage. Okay. So again, thinking about the carrots, we've got to motivate people to get them interested. But as you move down that sort of arrow, the motivations and the incentives you need to provide need to change. Because when you're at that adoption phase, when they're actually using it every day, you can't keep giving them little rewards for uploading a document, making a comment, or editing a page. The other thing we've built in as well is this idea there's a network layer. That kind of represents probably more current thinking that we realize, we really recognise that organisations are quite complex. The hierarchy doesn't actually represent that network of how people really work. Yeah, you might report to your boss, but when you've got a problem, you talk to Joe down the hole because he's worked for this company for 20 years and knows everything, okay? So we realise there's a bit of a network layer, and what we need to do is actually stimulate that network to help help us go in the right direction, okay? Now, as I said, how do we do that? How do we think about these people? We don't want to think about them as users because there's all this stuff, this thinking going on. Well, what I want to introduce is this idea from user-centered design called personas. Now, personas are different from thinking about users. They're also different from thinking about, I guess, types of people or functional needs. Personas are really a way of trying to boil down that whole complex mess of an organisation that you're trying to understand. Okay, I like to think of it in a way as a bit like you're writing a play about your organisation. So you couldn't put unless you're a really small organisation. You can't put all the employees on stage to tell their story. What we need to do is construct this scenario, this stage of actors who are our personas, who can tell the story. Now, anyone who's been to live theatre knows that you can really get immersed in that experience of seeing a play. It's real. You kind of know that those characters aren't real necessarily, but you can sort of engage with the story. And in fact, people on a business sort of side of the fence, they actually find it much easier to engage with narrative and stories and examples. Yeah, there's people that like the numbers to go with it as well, but people engage much better with a story. So that's what we're really trying to do with personas, is create the characters so we can tell stories about the organisation. And in this context, it's all about saying, how do we want to collaborate using a tool like Confluence? Okay, we try not to think too much about the specific technology. We want to focus on what is it you want to do. So how do we create those characters? Well, I've got a couple of examples here. These are very, very kind of summary personas. When we create real personas, there's a lot more detail to them. We also take into account things like technographics, which is a bit like demographics, but it's about how people use technology, what their attitudes to technology is. And in a business context or a company context, I want to understand about what are all the tools they're using, because when you drop Confluence in, they're not just using Confluence. They've got a whole bunch of stuff they've got to use as well. So I've got 3 example personas to take you through. So this is David, he's 31, and he supervises a team of customer service agents. And his goal is to make sure service standards and KPIs are met by the whole team. I guess there's a bit of an obvious hint there. If you were sitting down with David and saying, David, we've got this thing, Confluence, we think it rocks. And you should get in there, and we've been putting documents in there and editing wiki pages and doing documentation. Isn't it fantastic? You should use it. But if we look at David's persona, what's he interested in? He's not interested necessarily in uploading documents or editing wiki pages. What he cares about is the customer service process. Is it happening? So when you talk to David about what Confluence can do, what do you need to do? You've got to talk about what he wants in his language. Doesn't care about wikis, he doesn't care about Confluence. He cares about the service. What is his team doing? How well are they doing it? Okay. Next one is Sally. She's 46 years old. She's a qualified accountant. She's worked for the company for many years. And the most stressful time for Sally is the end of month reporting. Okay, 2 things there that I read from that story. And again, these are made up personas, so they're a little bit obvious if you like. But the first one is, she's worked for the company for years. If you're the new guy or girl in the company, again, coming in with this Confluence thing, isn't it wonderful? Sally's going, yeah, I've seen that before. Yeah, there's like 5 years ago some guy came in with this SAP thing. Yeah, that worked well, didn't it? Do you know what I mean? She's been around. There's a history of change. You've actually got to take that into account with the individuals you're dealing with, because one person doing the same job who's been around for 6 months might be like, oh, gee, the systems here are awful. Can we fix them? Confluence would fix that. The next person doing the very same job, maybe the same age, who's been around for 20 years, is going to have a completely different perception. So we've really got to get inside the heads of the people we're dealing with if we're going to show them how well Confluence can work. Last one is Brad. Brad's 24 years old. He's got a kind of a superhero thing on his shirt when he comes to work. He's Gen Y, he's a great engineer, he can solve everything in the world, and he hates email. He must be the perfect customer for a Confluence wiki, right? Yeah, you reckon? Trouble is though, I know lots of 24-year-olds who love email, hate technology, don't have an iPhone. I mean, there are certainly lots that are. And we've got to be careful, again, with personas that we don't fall into traps of making these caricatures, these assumptions. Just because someone's 24 years old doesn't mean they understand what a wiki can do and what a wiki can do in a business context. So don't use and abuse personas. The litmus test is when you read a persona, if you don't think that there are people like the persona in your organisation, the persona is wrong. The persona doesn't have to describe absolutely every individual. The personas don't have to be grouped by type. They should give you that stage. They should give you a feel that, yeah, I'm looking at the cast of my company. I can see a little bit of everyone in that cast of personas. And that's how you know you've got a good selection of personas. Now, once we've got personas, what do? Well, we create user journeys or user journey maps, and they tell a bit of a story. This is actually a real user journey we created that actually took us towards a Confluence-based solution. And what they are, literally, they are that story. And we take them out to users and say, look, we've thought about what you might want. Okay, and here's a story that tells you how it might work. What do you think? Now, if you're sort of familiar with kind of agile development, there's some very similar parallels here. We're not trying to define the solution exactly. What we're trying to do is engage with the users, those people, to say, is this kind of what you want? Or maybe you want it to be different. And what we find is that one is they can either validate the story and say, that's exactly what I want, give me 10 of those. Or they'll go, hey, that's close. You know, one, it's told me, you know, it's sort of reminded me of another issue. Or can we do it like this? Okay, so these are all tools for engaging with people to understand what they want. Now, some rules to collaborate by. So user-centered design, there's lots of information out there about personas and user journeys you can go away and find out yourself. So I'm hoping that sort of inspired you to go and learn more about them. And certainly come and talk to me after the session and I can tell you a bit more. But I want to give you some sort of 3 rules to collaborate by that you can take away and again, keep in mind as you're engaging with the people in your business. So the first one is, well, going back to that original diagram, it's really critical that you work with a network effect. We heard a great story yesterday about rocking companies with wikis, and I think there's a really valid story there about sort of getting out there, finding the champions, finding the influencers. There's actually been some research that suggests that if you get just 10% of users using a system, a social system, then that pretty much will pave the way for adoption across your company. It might not be immediate, but that 10% is critical. Now I think though, probably you've got to find the right 10%, okay? Those 10% have got to get value, they've got to be actively using it, but then it will start a wave of adoption. But you've got to work that network. That might require a whole different combination of techniques, guerrilla tactics, top-down support, all sorts of things. But yeah, work that network. Don't just put the tool out there and keep your fingers crossed, okay? You take your personas, you go out and think about who your stakeholders are, engage with people, bring an individual on board and say, what's the business problem that I can help solve with Confluence? Because once you do that, and people see that success, that's what's going to bring people through. And that's why, in a way, iPads and bottles of wine and all that sort of thing and stickers and T-shirts, they're great for that initial awareness stage, but it's not a sustainable approach for getting Confluence really rocking. If you really want it to work well across your organisation, you've got to have more tactics than just giveaways. The next rule to collaborate is take a walk in their shoes. Matt told the story of me going underground to look at a coal, look at what happens in a coal mine. I'm currently doing some work, ethnographic kind of work, of going out and talking to field workers in the utility to find out how they want to use social collaboration tools. And I mean, there's nothing that beats going out into the field, talking to people, and there are 2 benefits. If you think about the earlier diagram with working that network, and there's a bit of an innovation process you need to go through to get that adoption. Okay, one is you need to go out and find out what your users want. But there's also another process, a change management process. By actually going out and talking to people, showing an interest and saying, tell me about what you do, guess what? People are actually more willing to listen to you when you come back and say, oh, I've got a solution. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If you walk in going, hi, I'm here from IT and I've got a solution for you that you're going to love, and they've never seen you before, you've never spoken to them before, what do you think they're going to do? They go, yeah, right. If you've been in, though, and there's a history of you and your team going out into your business and saying to people, hey, we want to hear, what do you do? I mean, for the utility, one of the really interesting things for us is that we've got a real issue with devices. You can't give these utility workers a smartphone like an iPhone because they drop them every minute. They get rained on, dropped in puddles. So we've got a last mile issue there to overcome, but now that we know about it, but the other interesting thing is, though, that those those utility workers, lots of them have a cheap phone for work and they have a smartphone for themselves. And actually they like taking photos and they like using the technology. They just haven't been given the right tools. So you can only discover that stuff by going out and engaging with people. And finally, don't give people blank workspaces. I think that's really critical. You don't, stand up Confluence out of the box and say, hey guys, this is fantastic, go play. Just create something. There's two problems with that. One is, just that whole, we're going to end up like Monkey, basically, disorganized chaos, and maybe they'll reach their final destination on their journey, okay? We don't want that. The other issue is that if you give people blank workspaces, well, if I give you a blank piece of paper and say, write something, you're kind of going to sit there going, oh, what do you want me to write? Okay, it's actually quite confusing for people. The other issue as well is that, and I've experienced this where we've got people from different areas of an organisation to come together, and there's sort of activities like card sorting, for example, where you go through how we're going to structure the navigation. Okay, what I've also seen is that terminology can differ across an organisation. And it's not just about how you organise the navigation, but even how you're going to use Confluence. People can have very different ideas about where information should go from and who it should go to, where should that information live, but also what are the phrases and terminology you're going to use on the page to describe what something is. Okay? The only way that you can actually again engage with people to explore meaning is actually to start drafting something. Okay? Now you can't quite see this picture, but there's a door. There's a door at the top of this scaffolding. And that's what I really want you to think about, is that you create scaffolding for people. It's not necessarily the permanent solution. But what you want to do is sort of give people the ability, the walkway, to get up that ladder so they can find the door, and then you can build the actual stairway, the permanent stairway afterwards. And I think that's really one of the really powerful things of Confluence, is that we can stand up Confluence quickly, and we can actually construct that scaffolding for people in real time. You can run a workshop or a session with people in your organisation. Say, hey, let's have a go. Let's start to create the scaffolding to think about how we want this thing to work. And it doesn't really cost you anything. You just go in and you create spaces, you create labels, you start using the macros, you can explore with people, and you can take it down again. I mean, it's a very agile way of developing an intranet, if you like, or an information management system for your company, but using kind of agile information management techniques rather than going off and sort of planning everything for people. Actually get them in the room, get them planning and thinking about it. Now, the other thing I should just say as well, that I think there's some really key and useful resources out there that can help you with this task. First of all, Atlassian University, and I guess and there's other options for training, but if you're going to identify champions in your organisation who are going to help support your journey of getting Confluence out there and being used, you need to give them the right skills. Those champions have really got to know, not Confluence inside and out, but they've got to be confident. And they've got to know all the different techniques. They've got to know how to use the macro wizard. They've got to be comfortable creating tables, embedding images. So make use of the tools that are out there that can help upskill people. Get those champions, really make them the super users. The other one, I think, if you're the Confluence administrator or you're the business analyst, for example, going out and talking to people about Confluence, is that you've got to be aware of the solutions that are out there that go beyond what you get in Confluence out of the box. And the reason I highlight that is that you're going to go and talk to a guy in accounts, for example, or you're going to go and talk to a guy in HR. They may have very different business needs from each other. And what you really need to be, either be familiar with or have the ability to go and check the marketplace and say, look, I've listened to what you've been saying, and we don't have it right now in what we've done with Confluence, but we can plug it in. We can get that plug in. We can build that business process for you if you think that's what you really need. Okay? Now, double-edged sword, and I mentioned the sort of a story about spreadsheets. And I was working with a company, so all these different business units, and we went to see the finance staff, and they said, oh, look, we couldn't possibly use any sort of online collaboration tool where we upload documents. We're very reliant on email because we have these spreadsheets, and all the spreadsheets are linked together, and we need to sort of know where that spreadsheet has come from and what it's linked to. And we said, okay, so how many spreadsheets are you talking about that need to be linked together? Maybe we can achieve that online and just have the spreadsheets linked online. And I said, oh, there's thousands. Here, I'll show you where I've saved all these spreadsheets on my laptop, for example. So you know what we did? We actually used some network mapping tools to create a linked map of all these spreadsheets. And it's crazy. There were lines going everywhere. And we're going, whoa, this is too big a problem. We can't solve this problem. They're just going to have to keep using email. save them on their file shares and their laptops, and we'll move on to the next group. But then we did a little bit more digging, and we sort of discovered really that there were actually just thousands and thousands of duplicates of the same spreadsheet. And they were referencing each other's spreadsheets, but they were being passed around by email. So, one spreadsheet might reference the same spreadsheet, but multiple copies. And that's why it was such a mess. And they sort of got to this point because they were reliant on email. Once we understood that, we could pull them out and talk about why going online was a much better way of putting a document in a common place. So rather than referencing the same spreadsheet in thousands of copies, hundreds of times, they actually just had one version. So you've got to be careful you don't jump to assumptions about solutions or what you can or can't do. You've got to dig in, but you've got to be ready and say, hey, we've got a solution for that. I've understood your business problem, and we can do that in Confluence. And finally, Game Storming is a fantastic book. So those personas, head, heart and hand, the idea of creating user journeys, there's some really fantastic workshop techniques that you can go away. Make sure you get a nice big stack of Post-it notes, some big, lots of Sharpies and flip chart paper, but you've got a great guide there for going out and actually exploring with people what their needs are through some workshop techniques. So there's lots of resources out there to help you. Now, I did say that I was going to come back to head, heart and hand at the end. So just grab my notepad. So let's just revisit some of the things that people said. So one of the rational responses was, why do I need this when I've got email? Well, having listened to what I've talked about understanding people, do you think that kind of response is sort of just, is that stereotypical? Does that really reflect what people's rational response is? Or do you think it might be a bit more complicated about that? I don't know, Matt, if you can just help, if people have got any thoughts. The other ones were, how is this better? No time to learn a new tool. Is that SharePoint? Some of the emotional responses were whining. I've got no time, I don't care, fear. And that sort of, the hand was, I've got to have all my spreadsheets on there. I need templates, I need training. Has anyone got any sort of other ideas or counterpoints to some of those original ideas? So when you're thinking about what that user really wants and the individuals, the different motivations, what other things might be part of that rational, emotional, or tactical need? I did say I was going to ask you to think.
Yeah.
Do you want
to... So from what I heard, people are conscious that they might be investing time in a tool that they're not going to get benefit out of, especially a social tool.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, because from a sort of a solution provider point of view, we've got this fantastic tool, isn't it great? And you feel that someone's just saying, I've got no time to learn about that, and it can seem very arrogant. But actually, when you delve in data, what people are saying is, I'm short of time. You want me to put time into this? How do I know that actually I'm going to get what I'm promised? So one way of counteracting that is really through stories, examples of how other people are using it, if you can get those champions working. But I think that's a really good point of just sort of going that step further, with not again saying, oh, just because they said they haven't got time, that's just they're just these terrible users. They won't take any interest in what I've got, not innovating. Actually, got to dig a bit further and see what the real problem is. Anyone else got any ideas?
Yeah, Chris. So what Chris was saying was that the people expected, or that the expectation was that Confluence was a knowledge-based tool, and that people felt that they needed to have their information or their articles that they put up on Confluence in a final form before sharing them. Yeah.
So again, another good example of why sort of terminology that we choose to use, people can make assumptions. Again, the word collaboration itself, as I said at the beginning, is just really misunderstood. People aren't sure what it is, and if you go out saying, even I've got a collaboration tool, that can create confusion. They think, oh, is it real time? Is it like web conferencing? Or in the case of knowledge management, oh, it must mean it's got to be these polished, these gold standard documents that I upload, and mine's not gold standard, so I won't use the system. So again, you've really got to think about what, the words you use, the examples you use, again, how you talk to people about what you're trying to do. If you don't talk to people in words and language that they understand, and if you don't focus on their context of use, then you potentially risk getting that misunderstanding. And yeah, okay. Have we got time for any more questions or feedback? Time up? Time up, okay.
Awesome. Thanks, James.